Like any small business, there's no doubt, there's a few mornings you wake up and you're a little less energetic about what it is moving forward. That's probably been more in the last couple of years, no doubt. But there's a great energy around, the creativity bit of doing your own thing, no doubt. And when you can put aside the business bit and focus on the doing bit, then it becomes a lot easier, and just working through that process. And it comes around quickly. The vintages, as Nick would know, roll around before you know it. We're already looking, we're into pruning now, so we've already forgotten 24 and we're into 25. With our, especially as growers, your mind wanders forward really quickly. So it's good, and I still would do it this way. I think if I had my time over again, I wouldn't change it, because at the end of the day, you control your own destiny to a degree, and there's nothing better than doing something for yourself.
Richard Leask is an authority on regenerative farming for growers in South Australia and comes with a wealth of experience that includes taking on the Nuffield Scholarship, which saw him travel the world in search of sustainable approaches to bring back to home soil. He's as knowledgeable as he is passionate about protecting the land for future generations, and his own vineyard is a breeding ground ripe for putting new ideas into practice. Richard and his brother Malcolm have been growing their own label, Hither Yon, for the past decade, putting their best foot forward to adapt to the changing climate for more sustainable vines and better wines. Here's Richard.
Welcome to Healthy Minds, Healthy Vines, the wellbeing podcast for growers, proudly brought to you by the Wine Grape Council of South Australia and sponsored by PIRSA. Hosted by award-winning mental health podcaster Callum McPherson and wine columnist for The Australian, Nick Ryan.
Richard, tell us a bit about your family history in the industry.
Well, it started, my father was a reluctant grape grower, I suppose, in a way. So he's...
Aren't they all?
Yeah, probably are. His family are into citrus, Central Coast, New South Wales. So his father was on the citrus board there, and they grew lemons and mandarins in that country. And then he and his twin brother were into earth moving and did a lot of stuff around Canberra, building some of the Snowy River scheme and bits and pieces. And he ended up at Rothbury with Murray Tyrrell, because he knew machinery and he knew how to grow things. So hadn't done anything in vineyards, but just turned up and got a pretty fair and stern education there under Murray, I think. And then stayed in the Hunter, working for Tulloch's for quite some time, until the company that owned Tulloch's owned Rycroft in McLaren Vale, and after a number of vintages in the Hunter, he just got moved to the Vale to run the vineyards down here, which were a fairly substantial holding at its day, along with the winery. And that's where we moved down when I was 5, I think. I'd only just started school in Cessnock and then lobbed into Wollonga, which was a pretty sleepy little village in 1978 probably. So it was pretty quiet, and that's how we got into it, and then it just sort of evolved from there. He worked for Tulloch's, and Gilby's Gin owned that company at the time, and then that all folded. He was left to clean house. He was the last guy to close the door in the winery, sack all the staff, do all that sort of stuff. So that wasn't a particularly fun time. But out of that, along with Jeff Hardy, they bought a block, one of the Rycroft vineyards, which became Pertaringa, and they got started. He figured he'd worked out quickly enough that McLaren Vale was a lot easier than the Hunter.
I was going to say, it would have been a blessed change.
So he thought, well, if I'm going to have a crack, we might as well have a crack here. And obviously, with my younger brother, we were ensconced in school, so here we stayed, and away we went.
And was winemaking and viticulture always on the cards for you?
I think, as Nick said, probably not. I mean, I was naturally into farming. I enjoyed ag and biology and things at school. But I think, subconsciously growing up through that period, you knew you were on the bones of your backside most of the time. Not that it was bad, but it was tight and it was difficult.
And you'd seen your dad do it tough.
Yeah, exactly. And that plays on relationships as well. So mum and dad sort of separated in that period. I've no doubt something to do, the stresses of running a business in that period would have been part of it. They stayed in business together, but that might have been, along the way. So I probably avoided it for a fair time, and I went to Roseworthy thinking doing ag science specifically, and lasted 20 minutes because I just couldn't be inside any longer. I had enough. There were 2 days a fortnight where you got to be on the farming enterprises. Loved it. I just lived
More of a
for
prac man.
Yeah. It didn't matter what it was. I was happy to be out and in doing it. So I sort of, dropped out of that and then fumbled around for a while. But that sort of coincided with the boom, and then they needed young people, and the thing looked like it was going somewhere, and it was exciting, and away you went. And so before you knew it, or before I knew it, you fell into it.
But I guess growing up in a winemaking community, though, it's always just sort of sitting there under the skin a bit. So. There's an osmosis thing that happens.
Yeah, and all your mates that you sort of hang out with, they're all in the industry, and away you go. So before, like I said, before I knew it, I was into it, and away we went. So, but I stayed at home for a little while, but conscious that I needed to get out and have a look at a few things, and then off you go.
What is the vision for the future of a young man going into a boom industry at the time, thinking this is going to be, this is easy and Mercs in the driveway for the rest of my life?
Well, I think probably the first thing is that we didn't know how good it was until it's over, like most booms probably. It looked a bit endless because there was a lot happening. I didn't always take the path of, the well-trodden path. So I worked for a small company in WA for a little while in the Swan, so very unglamorous wine region at the time, in the mid-90s, and then ended up in corporate land with BRL at Banrock doing some stuff, which was exciting. They were moving a big plans and multiple locations, and you'd get together and even company conferences of viticulturalists and things, and there was a lot going on. So it was like, far out, this is pretty cool. And then I don't know, you just sort of drifted back to home because you worked out along the way what's good about corporate land and what isn't. And I don't fit rules very well. Got into trouble a few times trying to bend them, and I thought, well, before I make their life difficult and my own, maybe I better get out and do my own thing.
But is there something structurally that you take out of that sort of experience and into your own business?
Doubt. Yeah, absolutely. The systems are great in big companies. They're very good at them, and they do have their place. And lines of communication are always good and strong. Governance is good, and understanding, the mechanisms behind all the cool stuff that needs to happen to run a business. So they're very good at that sort of thing. But they can obviously be constraining as well because, at the end of the day, you're fulfilling what they want to see as their end product and image, and bending, creativity in that space is a bit difficult sometimes. So
what's the origin story of making your own and doing it for yourself?
Oh, well, it took a while for that to happen. Really it stemmed out of changing varieties in a vineyard. So we had a vineyard at home that was McLaren Vale is a great region for growing everything. It's a strength and a weakness, so you can do just about anything. So we had a vineyard that was a bit of everything. Very serviceable through the boom, but quickly became unsaleable as we came out of that into the first of the...
Yeah, but the vineyard was set up to sell to other people.
Correct. Yeah. But all that fruit needed to be removed, mostly because of market to start with, but then it was pretty clear it wasn't going to work moving forward into climate as well. So as we started changing varieties, the idea of making it into wine just sort of crept in a way, because we realised we were one of very few people doing, some of these what are now alternate varieties. Maybe it's a bit of, as you mature, you get a bit sick of being on the end of the stick as well. So it's like, well, if I'm going to cop that, maybe I'll do it myself. And then before you know it, you do it. Now, we started off with no Hither Yon wasn't going to look like it does now. It was going to be 2 or 3 wines and keep it simple.
Yeah. And it's a bit like with some of those, emerging varieties. It's it's like the display home principle. Like you've got to show people what it is, and so you can sell it. Absolutely,
and at the time, and it's still relevant to a degree that 5 tons is not enough and 10 tons is too much. Like there's a very small market for that, and it has taken some time. We're a decade in 12 years in for the first 2 or 3 that we put in, and they were a hard sell for a long while because the next semi boom that we've just sort of come out of was all about Shiraz Cabernet. So having these little things around the edge was interesting. And it created a bit of interest, but it really looked like it was more, well, if we're going to really have a crack, we might as well just do it ourselves. And I think that's where it got to. It was like, well, bugger it. going to go down the tube, you might as well do it under your own steam.
Yeah.
So
what's it been like to stick at it through all that time?
Look, it's good. It has its days. I mean, like any small business, there's no doubt. You know, there's a few mornings you wake up and you're a little less energetic about what it is moving forward. That's probably been more in the last couple of years, no doubt. But there's a great energy around, you know, the creativity bit of doing your own thing, no doubt. And when you can put aside the business bit and focus on the doing bit, then it becomes a lot easier, and just working through that process. And it comes around quickly. You know, the vintages, as Nick would know, roll round before you know it. You know, we're already looking, you know, we're into pruning now, so we've already forgotten 24 and we're into 25. You know, with our, especially as growers, your mind wanders forward really quickly. So it's good, and I still would do it this way. I think if I had my time over again, I wouldn't change it, because at the end of the day, you control your own destiny to a degree, and there's nothing better than doing something for yourself in that context.
And that's with your brother as well?
Yep. Yeah. So my brother and his wife Kelly and my wife Sharon, we're the Hither Yon. That's it. You know, we've got a little small extended team. I've got some guys in the vineyard, and Mal's got a few helpers in the wine thing, but you know, we drive it all ourselves, like most small businesses, and you know, jack of all trades. He's the indoor guy, and I'm the outdoor guy, and that works really well.
How's running all of that affected your relationships and over the years and bringing it all together?
It's been really good. I mean, I think people have commented that we're a bit odd that we get on with others.
Right.
It doesn't always happen that way, but we've been best mates for as long as I can remember. You know, we do stuff outside of work. You know, if we're going to the footy in town, we go together. We play a game of golf together or whatever. You know, my kids are older than his, but so there's a bit of a synergy now where, you know, they're sort of babysitting and doing those things and hanging out with him. So we do a lot of stuff together, which is good. So we've always just got on, which has been nice. Yeah. It makes running a business a lot easier when it's tough.
Well, is it? Yeah, I guess it's an advantage if you know each other's strengths and weaknesses from day one of a business.
Absolutely.
And you can divide those sort of, you know, responsibilities accordingly.
Yeah, and having clear and defined roles that don't overlap. Like, I don't have the skill set that he has.
Yeah, so if you complement each other rather than you both do the same thing. And
likewise, now we overlap a bit. I mean, I do some in-market stuff, and Mark loves helping out at vintage. Like, he loves it. You know, he'll put, I think he just closes the laptop and comes out, and he's out at every pick and in the winery a lot. You know, seeing fruit through. So there is overlap, which is great because we both have a unique understanding of the challenges that both people face. But then there is a really clear role for each of us that we don't get in each other's way, per se.
You've also been around the world looking at regenerative farming practices. Just give us some examples of some of the things you've seen and learned on your adventures.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was a remarkable experience for a number of reasons. I mean, the timing was immaculate, 2019, and then, you know, 6 months later, all the places I visited, I wouldn't have been able to. So yeah, that brought it home pretty quickly. Look, we were talking, the context is always around soil in farming. You know, we talk about it a lot. It's our bread and butter, but we don't, for a lot of respects, we don't take care of it as much as we perhaps should have. We take it for granted. Now, some places do it more so than others because they've got a lot more of it. Australia's always been pretty good at it, to be honest, because we realise that we don't have that 15 feet of good topsoil, so we need to be pretty careful. So in that context, it was about going around looking at practices that improve that on the back of this sort of generic soil health principle that's kicking around, which is a whole heap of different mechanisms. You know, and in 2019, that really hadn't resonated, particularly in broader viticulture in Australia. There were people doing fantastic stuff, as there always is, around the edges and in the shadows that no one ever sees, which is one of the good things about going on these trips, because you're never first. If you think you've invented something, you haven't. There's a guy in a paddock somewhere that's done it for 20 years, which is a good leveler. So it was just about going and finding good practitioners of soil management. Now, one of the good things about the Nuffield is that it puts you into all sorts of ag businesses, which is, as I found at Roseworthy, I really like. You know, I like looking at all sorts of different stuff. So I just wandered around trying to find good practitioners of that, and then some good viticultural examples from other places in the world that would be easily, you know, adaptable to Australia, or at least you could talk about it in a context that suited our climate and our rainfall patterns and things, because it's easy. A lot of these things are easy in higher rainfall zones, but we don't have a lot of those, and we're a major viticulture thing. So it was about wandering around looking at all sorts of stuff, and then just keeping an open mind about how we incorporate that into viticultural practice and change.
Were there some that stood out?
Yeah, look, there was some really good. One of the last visits I did was to a guy called Peter Barrett in in the South Island of New Zealand, so on the east coast, so central Otago, and then head straight east from there. And it looks like Mount Pleasant is what it looks like. It's that sort of country, like rolling granite hills, but it's hot and cold at the same time. Like, it gets to 40 degrees there, but also it gets snow. So it's a really extreme climate. Fairly low rainfall, again, sort of 350 mils, which is, on the edge. And he was doing some fantastic stuff with cover crop in winter and doing it in summer, and building soil structure and using, a lot of natural ingredients, fish emulsions, live microbes and things as fertilizer bases for his farming system. It was a grazing system, so it had nothing to do with vineyard. But again, we were talking about soil, so he was trying to build the capacity of his soil to go better. And I took a lot out of that, the way he used different mixes, roller crimped cover crops, and a few other techniques that are now becoming a lot more mainstream. But just the way he looked at his farm, and then, those guys take a really long 360-degree view. They try not to get focused on the minutiae. They look at the whole landscape and then what it's doing in bits and pieces. So I really liked his setup, and good. And then I saw a couple of really good vineyards along the way. One in Central that were doing similar things with cover crop, but also undervine stuff, which was fairly new at that stage, having plants under the vine growing, providing an ecosystem that we've always seen as competitive. Well, maybe it's not. Maybe we can share that space and to the benefit of both the soil and the crop. And then a couple of really good ones in the US as well. So
is regenerative farming an option or an imperative?
Well, it depends on how you look at it. I mean, it's a broad church, because it takes in a lot of the organic principles, a lot of the biodynamic principles as well, about whole farm systems, closed loops, those sort of things. I don't think, if you're not thinking about soil health first and foremost in any farming system, then you're not going to be here for long.
Yeah.
Because you're going to mine it, and especially in this country where we just don't have the resource. It's heartbreaking to go across the Iowa plains, where they probably started with 30 metres of topsoil, they're down to 15, and they just waste it, because they can, in theory. But someone's going to pay the bill eventually, and we don't have that luxury here, so we need to be better at it.
Yeah, that mentality that it's going to last forever.
Yep. Yeah, it won't.
Can some of those really hard, bare, scarified places be brought back?
I think they can with plants. Now, how we do that and run a production system at the same time profitably is
Can't just leave it fallow and...
No. That's the exciting bit, if you want to look at it from that perspective, because I think if we don't change some thinking around how we do our viticultural systems for a number of different reasons, but soil predominantly, then we're going to get left behind. So I think it seems to be gaining a lot of momentum along the ways with the Eco Vineyards project, and there's lots of people, and social media is fantastic for it as well, coming out and this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm trialling in lots of different regions, and I've been lucky enough to talk at a few, and there's a lot of people doing some excellent stuff and rethinking the way we do viticulture, I suppose, in Australia to a degree when it comes to floor management. The upside of that is that some of these techniques, if we get them right, actually lead to less cost as well, potentially, because we stop doing and start watching and not doing stuff.
How important is that to the collective thinking and collective exploring, to do it, en masse rather than people in silos trying to find their own way through?
Well, it's incredibly important, because there's, one of the things that attracted me to Regen Ag was that there's no hard and fast rules. There's a bunch of really sound principles that are based on a whole heap of science that's been done for years, really. I mean, it's nothing particularly new. It's just about grouping them together in a coherent way. It's also a downside, because everyone says, oh, well, I only need to do this and I tick that box. So I think the more people that are playing around the edges and doing different stuff, it's going to be different in every region. what I can get away with in McLaren Vale, I might not be able to get away in Clare because I've got a frost risk, or Mornington's a lot wetter than me, so they're going to grow a lot more biomass. So how do we manage that? And some people can't have livestock, so that's another strength of it, is it fits all sorts of systems. As long as we don't, from my perspective, preach perfection, because there isn't. There's not in nature. Nature's inherently chaotic, so there's always going to be something a bit different about it. And we just need to be open to what we're doing now might be superseded tomorrow, which is why I don't particularly like the talk around certification of it, because once you set a boundary, set of rules, you're locked into that's how it is. So, and
you don't like rules, mate, do you?
It's coming through a bit, isn't it? I just think it stifles creativity, because it's like, well, it gives you certainty. Here's the rules. This is Regen Ag. And I think we need to be a lot more broader than that, because we don't even know what's in front of us.
What are those sort of key points of resistance or hesitation for someone who's not practicing Regen Ag, but is thinking about it, but is hesitant for what kind of reasons would hold someone back?
Well, I think uncertainty, because it is quite a different way of thinking. We've been, and I was trained in the same boat, that this is how vineyards are supposed to look. They're supposed to look incredibly tidy, incredibly neat. We can't have competition because the vines are the main thing, and it's all been about above the ground, and we haven't really focused enough about what's happening below it and what we can be doing to incorporate and enhance what we've already got. So if we talk, if you're talking about increasing soil health, that's based around microbial networks and soil carbon. Now, if we build that, there's some production upsides of that if we get that right. So if we might have to take a step back to get 2 or 3 steps forward, but we need to be brave enough to take that step. And that comes, I think, from, once there's a groundswell of people doing it and people looking at it over the fence going, well, that's actually possible, then it makes it a lot easier. And you're always going to have those early adopters. And I think the beauty of programs like the eco vineyards is that they bring them to the forefront rather than them doing it in the shadows to a degree. And then once people see it, they maybe that's possible. And so I've tried to host groups at my place, just come and have a look, and it's a warts and all. You can't talk about the good things and not look at the things that don't go well, because everything has a downside, and we've made some blues along the way, but that's okay.
Like what?
Maybe turning off the undervine area in terms of creating competition in younger vines is really challenging. We've probably stifled a bit of growth along the way, so we've had to rethink that.
Stifled as in just sort of slowing, not really detrimental, but
no, it would take a year out of production that perhaps you would have. The way we've run livestock, I think, is getting better in terms of managing their health and the vineyard's health per se, and just being flexible around doing things. So we went from one bad habit to another bad habit with herbicide cultivation, and then we realised that's actually not going to be the answer as well. So you're always evolving along the way once you do that. So some of those mistakes are, from a business point of view, you end up with a whole heap of machinery that you now realise you didn't need to buy if you'd just taken a little bit more time to think it through. So I tend to move a bit fast sometimes, and sometimes that's good, and sometimes that's a detriment.
Yeah. What does Leask Agri do, and who do you work with?
That's my vineyard management company per se, but it's tiny, really. I mean, at the end of the day, it was sort of born out of, again, managing quite a few vineyards in the sort of boom area, and that was mainly for supplying fruit to the major wine companies, which was fine at the time. It was all going well, but as that became more difficult, and as we started to develop our own brand and understand what it feels like to be able to see the fruit all the way through to a finished product, it naturally morphed into working with other like-minded wine companies. So smaller companies in McLaren Vale, by and large, that had their own vineyards that were taking that right through to the finished product. So Steve Pannell's been we've been working together for a long time. When he first bought his the first vineyard, Camellia, in McLaren Vale, and he's added a few more along the way. So that's been a great relationship where we're just behind the scenes, really doing the day-to-day management and sort of providing the all the skill sets so that he can hopefully have we don't bugger it up, is what we try not to do, which is for everyone. Julian Bernice Hong at Ministry of Clouds, we do a little bit with them at their vineyard in McLaren Vale. We run that. Just those like-minded people, and they need to have the same. whether it's from them or from us, the vineyard management philosophy has been the same. We need to be in that zone, otherwise it just doesn't work for me anymore.
And you usually bringing the regenerative practices over?
Not as it sort of went. It was a softly approach. It wasn't like I don't want to preach about doing that sort of stuff because it's not for everyone. I'm happy to talk about what I've done and where I think there's some advantages to do it, but people need to walk their own path on that. I just don't think you can stand at the pulpit and say, this is what you have to do. So a lot of it was like, I'm going to try all the stuff at my place because it's safe, and I'm prepared to take the risk, but I didn't think that was appropriate for clients. So, the management plans were fairly similar they're always on the softer end of the scale in terms of intervention, but they naturally morphed into this because they were looking at the Nuffield, obviously, and the report I wrote was like, well, what are you doing? Yes, I'm doing that. Well, that's interesting to us. Can you do that? So before really we knew it, we were doing it on, instead of 20 hectares, we were doing it on 200. And it was like, shit, this has got out of control a bit.
So you're the guinea pig, and then
little bit.
People are interested in what they're interested in, and maybe you can expand on it.
Yeah, I think so. And that's what happens. And then, of course, that's a great learning because then you realise that every site's different. So Steve's got 3 vineyards that are going to end up being managed totally differently from each other. The overall philosophy is the same, but just for the sites, they're going to end up with a different plan. One will be slightly more interventionist, one will be in the middle, and one's going to be totally hands-off just because of the way they're set up.
And does that take some time getting to know a site and its unique characteristics? You can't just sort of come in from day one and go, right, this is how it works here.
Well, it does for me. Maybe I'm a bit slower on the uptake on things, but I think you need to give yourself that moment, take that time, because like I said, even on our 2 family vineyards, the Sand Road site is where we try everything. We have a fair go at all of it, and warts and all. Whereas Dad's got a site that's got a commercial element to it, where it's 2 other wine companies that perhaps, although most of them, to be fair, now view vineyards a lot differently than what they did 10 years ago. But it's a different site. It's on a slope. It's got sandier soils. So what we do at Sand Road doesn't necessarily fit up there for the fact that it's a different aspect and bits and pieces. And that's why I'm always open-minded to how people do things, because no one knows their site better than the person who runs it. So if you're meeting someone and talking about why they do something, it's really important to listen to what they're saying. Rather than say, well, you just can't do that. It's like, well, why do you do that? And what's the reasoning behind it? And I think that's important to tease that out.
So, Richard, I think we're talking, a lot about changing systems, and it's a constantly evolving and dynamic and rapidly changing environment out there, and part of that has been trading of carbon credits and this race to zero, and it's not as simple and straightforward as it sort of might appear. It's an admirable goal, but it's a tricky path to get there. And we're talking about carbon roadmaps is a phrase that gets bandied around a bit. I mean, are there threats or dangers or that you see in this dynamic environment?
Oh, most certainly. I mean, from our perspective, our brand is carbon neutral, so we do that, both the brand and the product, so operations, everything. Now we do that by offsetting. We measure and buy credits in and knock it out that way. And of course the soil health principles are all, it does come back to carbon a lot. We've got to build soil carbon. We've got to build soil carbon. Now it has two effects. I'm looking at building soil carbon from a production gain perspective, because I know it does a whole heap of things to the soil profile that should give me an uplift in production and a few other things. But then of course at the moment the topical thing is carbon credits and the sale thereof in ag to get other products through to carbon neutrality, because of course that usually all happens downstream from the farmer. Farms themselves, particularly intensive agriculture like vineyards, use a lot of carbon. So one of the things we've been talking about is doing less. That takes inputs out, that takes carbon out. Putting carbon in the soil is really bloody hard. So we've been measuring it, we've been baselining it, and over the 5 years we've been doing things. We're trying to get a handle on how well we're going on that. But it's also a cycle. It gets used in the natural environment. So building it on a really linear stepping stone level is incredibly hard. And being able to then say, right, I can sell that patch because I know that I'm going to be able to build X in the future, I think is fanciful probably at the moment, you know, with what we know about it and the way it's measured. I mean, I've done 5 years worth of looking at it, and the rules have changed twice about how you measure it. So my first lot of rules have now been thrown out the window because we've changed the metrics for that. So again, it's a bit like the weather; it's changing really rapidly. So knowing what to measure is difficult. So I would caution at this stage that, because I think farming businesses are probably going to need it to inset. I mean, let's assume for a moment that we're all going to go to race to net zero by 2030 or 2050 or something. Well, when all the industrial people in the world have got to offset stuff, do you reckon Hither Yon's going to be able to buy credits? Well, it's going to be competitive, and we saw it when the last co-op meeting happened and everyone signed up to be net zero. Well, the price of carbon went up on the markets by 200% because it became tradable. Yeah. It's like any other commodity, supply and demand. So what cost us X the year before cost us X times 2 the next year. So we'll get priced out of it. So I think if we adopt these farming systems and we can measure and understand carbon and biodiversity credits, because I think they're probably a little, maybe slightly simpler, then I suspect we're going to need to keep that rather than give it.
So everyone in this business needs to be really thinking about that, learning what they've got, and understanding that there's a future value on those things that may not be so evident right now, but
because
it's coming.
As an export product, you know, the export market's going to demand carbon along with other things. You know, what's your footprint before you come in here? Here's the carbon tax. So it's coming, and wine's difficult. Because it's obviously high carbon in its production. But I'd say just hold and understand, because it changes. It'll change another 5 times before we get to a standard setting along the way. You know, what we can do with vineyard area that's not useful, which we've done, is that, you know, we've pulled a block out. We don't really need it from a production point of view, so we've put it into biodiversity. Yeah. So plant it up for, you know, diverse. We can use. There's a lot of mapping around that that's pretty interesting, and we're part of a pilot project with PIRSA that hopefully that'll come out with some data around how to do it again, so that people can go off and understand what the benefits might be. But you know, that's where potentially you know, unusable bits of land or bits of vineyard where you don't need it. Maybe we can do that then helps the business overall. But I wouldn't be giving it to anyone else at the moment.
Yep.
How much are you seeing people who've previously been stuck in their ways coming around and trying something different?
Oh, well, I think it's happening quickly. It feels like it, to be honest. I mean, McLaren Vale's always been on that slightly greener edge as a region. You know, there's a lot of biodynamic practitioners and organic practitioners, but, you know, I'm seeing it in the bigger corporate vineyards in McLaren Vale. There's some change in that, the way they're run. 100% cover. Under vine and mid-row all the time. There's some guys there doing some great work, which would be challenging in that environment to a degree. They're doing it in Coonawarra. I've met with Ben Harris and his team down there for wins. They're doing some interesting stuff, and that stands out in regions down there because it's not natural. So I think it's growing as it goes along organically, for want of a better term, because I think everyone understands it works from both levels. You know, there's a soil health level, but now there is potentially an economic level when you can stop doing tractor passes that are expensive and people are expensive and still get an outcome that's good. Then I think there'll be a natural sway towards it, and we'll get a lot of people across the line, and there'll always be the people that just don't get it, and that's okay. Yeah. You know,
how much effort and expense is involved in switching over the system?
It's interesting. I think it'll actually get cheaper because we're understanding how. I mean, I've done it just by letting stuff go and, you know, letting the chaos take over, which has worked by and large. But if you started, because of the development in, you know, they're now developing specific equipment to put seed under vine. You know, that wasn't a thing 5 years ago. Really, you did it by hand or you let it come up and you hope that you got the stuff you wanted. But if you've got a bare vineyard area now with a bare undervine, you know, the potential to be able to spray seed undervine with the crop that you wanted, that we know after a heap of research and trial and error will be around the mark for your region, is going to become pretty normal, you know, I would think, in the next 2 to 3 years, to be honest. So that setting it up actually will get easier to a degree as there's more information that's out there and the confidence that people are doing it.
Yeah, as that evidence builds up.
Yeah, and that's what it is. You know, it just takes enough. Well, these guys have been doing it for a while. It won't perhaps we won't go broke if we try it.
Is that just another kind of homogeneity though? Suddenly every vineyard for miles has sort of the same cover crops and, where's...
Well, I think there's a challenge. Well, that would obviously be potential, but again, if you take McLaren, for example, there's about 50 different soil types, so some stuff's not going to grow in some way. So they're natural, nature will win eventually. Coonawarra might be a bit different because you've got a pretty similar soil type all the way along, but I would argue that 100% cover all the way along there is going to be more benefit than not, even if it's all the same to a degree. So you just get no benefit from bare soil. It doesn't do anything for you, and the more we can cover it with plants that are useful. I've got plants that aren't. They're not all good. But more of the ones that are good, then that's going to help along the way.
So what are the ones you don't want, and how do you manage that? When you say it's chaos, but there's got to be some control to the chaos.
To the madness.
Yeah, well, you need to have need to set some boundaries. Look, summer weeds are a pain in the ass. I've yet to find a use for prickly weeds like caltrop and innocent weed and three-corner jacks. If anyone can show me how they're useful, they are somewhere. And cooch and kikuyu are challenging. So this is where we get
In what way?
They're aggressive and they're easily spread and they're hard to get rid of. Especially non-chemical means. They're very difficult. So this is where we get into having an ability to pull different levers. And one of the reasons why I don't certify is that in these day and ages it's really it's expensive. So you need to. From my point of view, I need to be able to give myself every tool in the book to do it. So. We haven't done anything to our undervine management on the vineyard at home for 4 years. We've just let it go, and we've got some summer grass, some cooch and some paspalum that's grown. So we just have to get on top of it. So we're trialling a bit of cultivation. We're also trialling a bit of chemistry. Weed spraying, spot spraying it, just those particular patches out, and see whether that can control it over time. But I don't think you ever. Probably on our site, we'll never fully get it to exactly what we want. There'll always be a bit of intervention along the way. But, again, it's the majority rule. If we've got 95% of the place where we're not doing anything, where we used to do 4 or 5 intervention passes, well, they're miles ahead. If we have to do some stuff around the edges, that's fine.
With that desire to want to retain a bit of control and not hand it all over to certification bodies, how do you feel about certain markets trying to impose those sorts of regulations on you? We'll only buy from you if you are certified in certain ways. Is that a dangerous or a challenging problem?
Well, look, it is. But at the end of the day, there's no point doing something if it's not intrinsically in your DNA. If you're forcing yourself to do it just to sell something, and I know people can do it, but I'm not very good at it. As we've explained, I tend to bust out of that pretty quickly. So. It's fine. I understand why they're there, for a lot of things. I think wine's a slightly different kettle of fish than maybe fresh fruit or, meat or something along those lines where, there's an extra processing step in the middle which I think perhaps makes it slightly different. I just find it odd that, we're using a set of rules by and large that never changes, where everything else around us changes, especially in nature.
Too dynamic.
It's too dynamic. And we need to be flexible. I mean, if you take this season, I mean, I was talking to a grower yesterday. We were standing around in January looking at the hills in McLaren and they were green. And then in the first week of June, we're standing there looking at them. They look like a desert. So how can we manufacture and run our businesses when in a 4-month period we've got 2 totally diametric weather systems going on?
That's and at the wrong times.
So sometimes you just need to be able to pull some levers, But I think we need to do it with conscious thought. That's the big difference for me. It's rather than just doing, are there how many options have I got before I pull that lever, and do I really need to, or can I actually work with what I've got and not do that? And I think maybe that's getting into that regenerative mindset about just stopping and thinking before you do stuff is important for me, because we're rhythmical as farmers. Seasons and jobs, and that we quite often find ourselves just doing because that's what we've always done. Oh, it's May, we've got to get seeding, we've got to cultivate and do all that. by, spraying, we've got to do that before we do anything else. And, sometimes we just got to sit down and think, hang on, before that was what we had to train ourselves to do, or myself particularly in that first few years, is, right, before I do that, what are my options and why am I doing it, and what's the...
Farming's not done in a diary.
How do you plan for and set up for the randomness of nature that you're talking about? The golden question, mate.
Well, that's right. I mean, last year, I would fall into the gotcha category. We do as much as we can with the information that we're given, and I, like everyone else, looked at the weather and went, "Oh, thank God, I'm going to be in for a pretty cruisy spring," because the year before was a fair challenge, and then this year was even worse. Just totally changed on us. And I'm not to say we weren't prepared for it, but we kept thinking that rain event's an anomaly. And then the next one was an anomaly. And then before we got into the fourth one, we thought, actually,
it's the norm.
It's now totally different.
There's no such thing as an
we've got to stop
anymore.
thinking that the season was going to be like it was and then change. So, plan as best you can and be flexible, I suppose, and be kind. You're not. I mean, I didn't get it all right. I don't. Sometimes you can make some blues. Just try not to make them too big. Our system was actually pretty good in that respect because we had lots of material, we've got lots of cover. We can drive places where when the ground's wet, that was soaking up some moisture. So you've got to see some of the benefits in maybe some of the things you don't get to and think, that's helping me rather than hindering me, and then just deal with the stuff that comes at you as best you can. But I think I've tried to get better at being, kind with myself, because I like it to be spot on. I'm quite a planner. And if it doesn't go to plan to a degree, sometimes you can get a bit hard.
You're setting yourself up to fail a bit.
Yeah, a little bit. So sometimes you just need to be a bit gentle and go, okay, it's okay.
A lot of what we've been talking about has, all come from, your Nuffield Scholarship and learnings through that. And there's probably people out there listening who are thinking, that's something that they'd be interested in applying for and doing. Well, obviously you're going to say go and do it, but sort of what are the tips to, from a successful, scholarship winner to someone who's wanting to be a successful scholarship winner?
Yeah, well, finding a topic that has benefit to industry. It's great to have one that, personally is fantastic. But, I've got a real kick out of having something, and I was surprised, to be honest, about how maybe it's right place, right time, but it was, how it's been accepted and how interested people were and how it went. Toby Beckers, who was before me, I think his topic was much more topical about how to set up a brand and make it pay its way, but for whatever reason it wasn't as sexy, even though his trip was much more fun than mine. He went to, Pass Bailey Pearls and thoroughbred racehorse things and things. It was...
Yeah, he's a fancy pants, old
yes.
Beckers.
So, having a topic that resonates with industry is always going to be good, but not being too stuck on one, because you don't want to have a very specific topic where you go and meet Nick and he's already solved it. It's going to make for a very long 15 weeks, and it's hard to write 10,000 words on something that's already been done. So it doesn't happen a lot, but people do change mid travels.
Yeah.
But mine morphed along the way. I had a couple of different ideas, but it was always, as it came together, it was always about system change, really. And then I wanted to make, well, from my point of view, I wanted to make it practical, because that's what I am. I wanted someone to be able to pick it up and go, okay, well, I can actually start some of that tomorrow, rather than sort of be just a literature review and run through all the science behind it. I think people can do that on their own if that's what they're interested in. And then just going out with an open mind, really. And if you do that, then you're going to sort of take a lot more in. I'm not a very good question asker, so that was a difficult thing for me to do, to cold call and drop in on farmers and then feel like I had to drive the conversation along the way, even though I'd done a fair bit of research. It's just difficult. But some people, are good and they're open and away they go. But generally, if you turn up and ask someone to show them their system, they're pretty open, which is fantastic. They want to talk about it generally. And then you can just drive some questions out of that. But
well, you're very good at answering questions, mate.
I'm good at rambling on, as my kids tell me.
Yeah, aren't we all?
Talk, Dad. So... But asking them is difficult, and you guys are, in that seat. Doing the research is hard, but just turning up is not something I do well. Part of the Nuffield that I really enjoyed was the collaboration with the other scholars. So there's a conference where you meet the 75 or 80 from the rest of the world, doing all sorts of different stuff, and then the GFP, which is farmer race around the world, really, for 7 weeks with 10 other scholars. We had 5 different countries in that group and evenly split male female. It was awesome because they all come from different, and they're all different age groups, so their perspectives are different. So the conversations at night are amazing. So you could all go and look at the one thing and have 5 different outcomes from that based on other people's views on it all. And they're really robust discussions in the bus and on the plane and things, and it's a fantastic experience. Difficult, I think I was 16 weeks away in 2019.
Is there something key you saw in another agricultural pursuit that you think is really transferable to viticulture?
Difficult. I think interestingly, I think one of the things that wine in general has over most other agricultural things is the connection to customer that perhaps we don't see as much, even at a grower level. It is, in a lot of industries, it's 2 or 3 steps removed. Like they never get to talk to their customer.
Just send your wheat off to the wheat board.
Ever. Yeah. So we shouldn't take that for granted, especially as smaller producers and even suppliers to the bigger companies. In that they're only 1 step away, which is unique. So that's good. I mean, again, it's hard to place. There are other industries that are doing stuff really well with soil, which is good, and we need to just keep looking at those. Dryland farming, and Australia do it really well. They're incredibly efficient with what we've got. And they get maligned a bit, but there's some guys doing some interesting stuff in sowing into pasture and then pasture cropping and other bits and pieces that we just need to keep an eye on. For the fact that they do it with very minimal equipment and they're making a livelihood out of it, and then we're trying to do cover crops in Australia and vineyards where it's not the primary income earner. It's a huge amount of input, huge amount of effort. It's like, well, again, can we do this a little bit easier and the outcome will be different? So I just think it's always good to look at other businesses and industries and just see if you can glean. I mean, in my travels, I was the lone vineyard guy, and I thought, how am I going to deal with not seeing any vineyards? And you just go into whatever business you are and I did try and pick a topic for the day. So it might be a factory, processing plant, or how do they do HR, or how do they deal with their staff, or how do they market? So you just try and pick an angle that you can then translate back to your own business or your own industry and see how that might work. So just keep an open mind, I suppose.
And you went on that trip back then, and then a lot's happened in the last 5 years.
Yep.
You obviously really enjoyed it, got heaps out of it. So do you look at going back and checking in with these places? Are you researching online? Are you in contact on the phone? Probably not a case of, okay, I learned everything I needed to learn and then I came back and now I know it all. It's obviously something that's continuously evolving.
Yeah. Oh, look, I think what it did was reaffirm that my thought process I thought was on the right track, and then you start again. So then you start. Yeah. So the idea is to keep in contact. I mean, it was incredibly frustrating for the next 2 years to not be able to even go anywhere, and it was sort of.
You had all these ideas.
Yeah, I thought I'll go and chase this down. I mean, the reality of that might not have been quite as clear either, because there's a bit of a boy's own adventure about the Nuffield, where the rule book gets thrown out and you do whatever you want. So you come back to earth, pretty quickly. Where it's actually you need to be here, and need to be present, and run your business and be part of your family.
Yeah,
so boring. So that was, we're really happy that you did that, but hey,
back to work.
Cool
now.
your jets, Chief.
Yeah.
But what you do build up is a huge network, and from that, I've been lucky enough to speak at a couple of conferences, mostly locally, but I got to go to New Zealand, which was great, and then you meet people, a couple of soil scientists from the UK who's just mad bastard and fantastic, really interested in what we're doing, and then that just builds contacts, and it's like anything in life, connection, builds information, and you just try and keep in touch as much as you can. I think maybe with the industry the way it is at the moment, I've been quite focused on right here and now, and perhaps haven't lent as much energy to doing that a bit more, but there is a point somewhere where you have to just knuckle down and run your business and get your stuff done. But I think all of those things will still be there, no question. And there's people come out. One of the beauties of the Nuffield, alumni, I suppose, is that you get visitors from overseas. So I've had a couple who have been out on their travels wanting to look at bits and pieces, and they come and visit, and it's always good to chat. And they're all from different industries, not necessarily viticulture.
And you're talking about, great thing about wine is that connection to customer. Are you and Mel finding your customers more engaged in the changes you're making in the vineyard, and wanting, is that becoming a more important driver for the customer to
Well, I think for some it always is. I mean, some people want to be really connected to what their purchase is and how it's farmed. Some people, it doesn't matter quite so much. They might be on price, or it just might be on variety, or whatever it is. But it's just an easy, we just tell your story, tell who you are, and again, don't wash over what you think people want to hear or what they don't want to hear. Like, we're open and honest. This is how we do it, and then why we do it that way. Because most people with context will get it. There'll be people that perhaps don't understand that bit, or, well, I need it to be certified, so I understand what you're doing, but whatever. So that's okay. You can't convince everyone all the time, but if you're true to yourself, tell your own story, it's a lot easier, and it's a lot less demanding, if that makes sense. You don't tie yourself into knots, and that's why when people come out, I show them everything. Yeah, come and have a look at everything, and you can pick it apart, and I'll tell you why I think it works and why it doesn't. So it's important to be real, if that's the right word, I suppose.
Do you still get surprised going around and seeing how people are doing things? Do they ever surprise you with something you haven't thought of yet that's working well?
I mean, always, really. I mean, like I said, there's always someone who's been tinkering with something for forever. So yeah, there's bits and pieces. Hard to find a specific, really, but it's nice to see it happening in places where you wouldn't expect. Like I said, I'm a bit closeted in the Vale because my place doesn't look as odd as it would somewhere else, to be honest. If it was in a couple of other regions, it would look unkept. Whereas in the Vale, it sort of fits in with that ethos that's sort of kicking around. I probably noticed the other more without picking on people. That really interventionalist, traditional way of dealing with soil.
The scorched earth policy.
Grates a bit.
And you have to resist knocking on the door.
Well, a little bit. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm not here to be an evangelist. If people are interested, then I'll pass on the knowledge that I've got. But by no means, I don't think at the top of the tree there's people. I mean, there's people like Prue Hengske have been doing this for forever. Just ticking away at being environmentally minded with the way they run vineyards. There's always someone else. I just happen to be in the spot at the moment. I'm hoping that somewhere along the line I'll drift away. Then I get roped into having a chat.
And UML, the emerging varieties are such a big part of your business. So with using emerging varieties to form a crystal ball, what excites you about what's coming through in the Vale and what's next?
Yeah, well, we're excited because we're playing with some whites now, because we haven't done that much. The Vale's always been red focused, so some of these new Italian whites look interesting, and we get to play with some stuff we haven't seen. So Greco is looking really interesting. Structural type wines with good acid. Falangina is a new one that will come in along the way. And of course, Fiano and Vermentino, we've been a bit late to the party there, but we've been busy doing other bits and pieces. But now that we've got them in the stable, it's really exciting and interesting. So that gives us a bit of, diversity in that respect. And then, Nero's been a winner, along the way. It looks good. And, there's a number of other ones that I think just fit different pockets. It's a bit like the vineyard. It's chaos. There's probably way too many skews along the way if you looked at it. But as we were talking about, off air, it suits different bits of the market. So it gives you diversity, makes Malc's life, probably pretty hectic. But it gives you lots of talking points and bits and pieces to start people off, and I think it's good. And the beauty is that there's a lot of people doing it. And again, the Vale's being very open, and there's some great producers doing it. Andy Copper, Eleanor Ramble, Karina at Oliver's. There's a heap of people doing it, and I think again, the more that do these newer ones, the more accepting they become. I mean, it always sounds fun to be the only one, but it's not. Because people are more likely to pick it up. Fiano's a great example.
So if we gave you an empty suitcase and a plane ticket and said, go bring back whatever you want, what comes back in the suitcase?
Well, Malc wants Nerello Mascalese. No problem. He wants that tomorrow. I've been open. I don't really mind, to a degree. I think we haven't been too focused on it other than market drivers a bit and tastes, and then what we're looking at from a portfolio for a brand. And I think mid-weight reds and interesting whites probably the way to go moving forward. We need to make sure are a bit like that as well, which I think which is a great challenge, and it's going to be a fun project, and I think we're all working
Yeah,
towards
it's not
it.
all about just chasing the next thing.
No.
It's looking after.
Because it's still the biggest seller
Yeah.
at the end of the day. So we don't forget about that, and it's still a key part of our business. But what these other varieties teach us a bit is about what we perhaps can do with Shiraz to make it look a bit different and maybe suit the emerging palates that are coming forward. So we've run out of room. I should stop looking, to be honest. He's as bad as I am, actually, because he says yes to everything. What do you think? Yep, let's do that. No, so we actually needed someone to say no. Someone,
Yeah.
probably. But
We've had guests saying that their wine's really a reflection of them. You feel like that's the case for you guys?
I would hope so, because again, it's supposed to, it's an authentic product from place, and it has to have your personality in it. So we're not overly serious. Like, we're serious about what we do. I think people say this a lot, but we are. But I don't live and breathe wine or fine wine. I like it as part of a conversation starter and having a drink with my mates, but I could do that over just about anything. So the wines are supposed to have a playful nature. The label's playful. It's serious when you look at it. There's detail in it. There's a lot of thought gone into it, but it's colourful in it, and it speaks of a bit of fun. It's supposed to be fun. We've talked about it's not that fun, but it is, to a degree, really good fun, this industry, when we get into it. So the label's supposed to be that way, and we certainly portray it that way. The wine is about who you have it with and when you have it, rather than what it is or how much, how it's rated and those sort of things. All of those things help along the way, but it's I would hope it's a reflection of us, which is have a good time and do it well.
Do your kids see it as fun? I mean, you both got kids. Yours a bit older than Mal's, but is that part of the thinking, that this is something for a next generation?
I think the short answer is no. This was our creation, so we created it. It'll be up to them. His are a lot younger. He's 10 and 8 or something like that. I always forget. They'll scold me for that. Mine are older. I've got, sort of early 20s and one in year 12 nearly finished. Everyone's asking, who's the next. I don't know if there's a natural farmer in them. And we talked about when I was in my early 20s that I wasn't necessarily folding straight back in. So I'm open to it, but I've tried not to be too negative about it.
Yeah.
Which maybe I suspect that rubs off anyway, again, because we've been through a pretty tough period. They'll gravitate towards it or they won't.
Yeah.
And I'm comfortable with that. And if Hither Yon has a lifespan that's only, Mao and me, well, that's okay. That's what drove us to do it and keeps going along, and we'll ride that till it has its natural ending, whether it's someone else from our family takes it over or whatever. So,
do you look that far ahead, or more of a day by day?
I think you need to have, you need to have some vision, otherwise you never really extend yourself. But in terms of, can't wait for this to be a, first family's legacy wine. No, not that far ahead. Maybe, we have strategic objectives over 3-year periods generally and work towards those pretty steadily, and then you work on the next one. And like I said, every now and again you need to just look behind and go, shit, we've actually come a fair way. When you're grinding, we don't seem to be making any headway, and then, you think, 12 years ago we started with 2 varieties, now we've got 20. We've got a wine label that was going to be 3 varieties and, 500 boxes. Now it's more than you can drink yourself, so it's a proper business. And all of those things, it's evolving in front of you, behind you, around you, and quite often we get, a bit myopic on where we look.
Having a bit of a capacity to look back and reflect is going to help motivate you to keep going as well when that time.
I think it gives you the energy, and it's nice when other people come up and go, geez, you guys are going well.
Yeah.
Or, I wish I was not wish I was in your spot. You know what I mean? There's a recognition that you're actually a proper wine company.
Yeah, and just pick you up on something you just said, when you're trying to, keep your kids, not shielded from the negativity, but maybe we all need to be shielded from it a bit. I mean, there is, doom and gloom out there, and sometimes it can be a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If we keep talking about it, then it's not going to actually get any better. So what gives you cause for optimism?
And I've been like that at times. Again, you feed, what you feed is what you get. Yeah. And I've been, I know I've got better at pulling myself up and knowing that I'm in that sort of headspace. Like, hang on, that's the story I'm telling myself, rather than, there's an element of truth in it, but it doesn't mean it has to be my truth. You need to open yourself up. So gratitude's pretty big. You need to be, one of the things about Nuffield is that you get to see a lot of stuff and you realise that bloody hell we're lucky. No matter how hard it is, it's not as hard as lining up for fuel in Zimbabwe every day, or having no power for 20 hours a day and trying to run a small business. Someone's always doing it harder. And I know that's a bit of a cliche, but taking the time out to recognise that is important. We've got great healthcare, we've got kids are safe, all of those things we should never take for granted. So I try and, bring myself into that space. And it's tough for kids. Maybe it was tough when we were growing up, but we don't remember that. We always remember all the good bits.
Yeah.
But it's hard for them, I think, at the moment. There's the last 4 years as a 17 to 21-year-old, 22-year-olds, pretty weird time to be on the planet. I think even as us. I mean, I look back at 20, 21, 22. It's almost 1 year. Like you feel like there's this sort of void in there somewhere. So I think they just find their way and try and be supportive. And again, try not to be overly negative, but come out and have a look, do some work. Maybe they'll find it interesting, but find your own path. And that's what I've tried to say to them, because as much as I whinge about it at times, there's still a great deal of this business and industry that I really like doing. There's a really creative element to it that's fun, and I think by and large I really enjoy it. And you just got to work through the bits that are
we
tough.
should never lose sight of that.
No, exactly right. And like I said, it's a lot more creative than most other ag industries. Which is good fun. And everything's hard, really. There's not a sweet. If it wasn't a challenge, then
farming of all kinds.
Why would you get out of bed? Why would you get out of bed?
Yeah.
So you just need to manage that along the way, and that takes a bit of self-reflection from times. Yeah.
And what about the future of regenerative farming here in Australia? Do you think there'll be a time where that sort of becomes the norm, or how quickly is that taking shape?
Yeah, it's hard to know. I mean, I think there's elements of it everywhere anyway, and maybe it's highlighting some of the good stuff that we're doing, even if it shines a light on the stuff that was, is really poor management now as a plus. It'll go through its natural, sustainability phase, for want of a word, where it'll get washed and rinsed and dulled down. That's going to happen. But I think along the way, as long as we pick up the really key elements of it around looking after our soil and being open to changing farming systems to suit what's coming next, whatever that might be. It could be wet, could be dry, could be both. Then it'll have served its purpose, and then the next thing will come along, because that's the natural way of things. But I think the industrial way of doing ag is certainly closer to the end than the start, because the amount of chemistry we can use is going to become less, whether it's efficacy is running out or consumer demands or government demand that we don't use it. So we're going to need to get creative and work out what we can do with less, and some of that's going to involve using biology and using nature and reusing some of these older techniques that have been around for a long time, but we've forgotten about them because we've been able to do things differently. So it'll play a part, no doubt.
Where can people get in touch with you if they're interested in having a chat about how they might be able to put some of these things in place?
Oh, well, I'm on the telephone and the web and bits and pieces. I mean, obviously Hither Yon's a good start. Leask Agri's got an incredibly useless web page. I think that's been looked at for years, so it's not something.
I didn't see that. That was quite brief. I'll say that.
Yeah, again, it was we started that as maybe, but there's only so many hours in the day, and Hither Yon, that was started about the same time we were going to be 500 cases, so that clearly exploded. But, again, I'm freely available in the Vale. I'm down there all the time, and, I'm happy to chat. The Nuffield thing is put it out in the public domain, and so I've always remained that way. It's give back. A lot of people were really generous with their time and their businesses when I travelled, and their hospitality, and so I try and give back when I can. So that's part of it. So yeah, I'm not too hard to find.
No, good thing.
Yeah.
Thanks, Richard.
Thanks for listening. Head to the Wine Grape Council of South Australia website for links and further resources. This is part of a bigger conversation, so feel free to share this podcast with your mates and look after yourselves. Cheers.